You know, I wanted to start out this morning with a confession. Waiting has not always been my spiritual gift. Man, it's rough in here this morning. Especially during Christmas when I was a kid. This lack of patience and ability to wait was exposed in high, full-color definition. You know, in our family, Christmas Eve meant one thing: the longest car ride of the year. It was our tradition to spend what felt like several years driving through town, looking at Christmas lights before we were allowed to open presents. At first, it was magical. The light displays, just amazing ingenuity and creativity, music playing. This was a time when it was really neat for lights to kind of dance with music. And every now and then, somebody in the community would have, tuned to this FM station, and you can hear what our lights are flashing to, and it was magical. The lights, they twinkled, and there was warm nostalgia in the air. But somewhere around the 15th neighborhood, the wonder began to wear off. And my brother and I would slide down into our seats like we were being held hostage by inflatable Santas. And every turn down a new street felt like betrayal. And my parents lied through their teeth and said, just one more street. It was the same lie that they told every single year. But the year that I'm thinking about, that particular year, I had one wish. We got the Sears catalog, which I kind of miss. Had the Sears catalog full color, right? Hundreds of pages. And I had dog-eared strategically every one that mattered. I had strategically placed this catalog on every flat surface in the house, turned to one page. I left it open to the go-kart page. And I did this so often that I'm convinced that the binding had broken free at this point, right? So here's the deal. I knew what I wanted. I hoped that it was coming, and I waited for the moment. With the car ride that never ends, eventually we got home. And as was the tradition in my home, we tore through the gifts. We got some great ones. But there was no go-kart. I even checked outside because logically, that's where go-karts live. Nothing. And I remember that sinking feeling. The hope I had, it didn't deliver. And you've likely felt that too. Maybe it's not with Christmas presents, but maybe you've had that feeling in life. You've hoped that the job would satisfy. You hope that this relationship would heal the ache. You hoped that moving to the next stage of life would solve the tension that you feel in this current one. You hope that your plan for the future will unfold exactly the way you've imagined it. But it didn't. And here's the thing that we don't say. The thing that we don't say out loud, but we feel it so deep. What do you do? What do you do when the thing that you have hoped for cannot hold the weight of your hope? Because every single one of us is placing hope somewhere. We hope circumstances will change. We hope people will change. We hope the economy will calm down. We hope the holidays won't be stressful. We hope our kids will be okay. We hope that next year, it's got to be better than this. We hope and we wait. We hope and we wait. And sometimes we're disappointed. And somewhere along the way, we start to believe maybe hope itself just isn't trustworthy. As a result, you've learned to lower your expectations. You protect yourself by not hoping too much. Maybe your parents told you things like this: don't get your hopes up. Really? You've attached your hope to things that feel solid. But man, they still leak in the end. Because everything this side of heaven leaks. There's a family that I know years ago that decided they wanted to get a pool. But they weren't completely committed to this idea of getting a pool, like scooping out mounds of dirt out of their yard. So they decided that they would buy an above-ground pool. The kind it comes in a box about the size of a small car. And so they prep the ground. You're supposed to dig up the grass around, put a tarp down, put some sand and all this kind of stuff down there. There's directions, guys. And so they prepped the ground, they laid out the frame, they snapped in the liner, and they filled it with water. Thousands of gallons of water. The kids, they were ecstatic because summer had officially begun. Around day 3 of pool ownership, the dad noticed that the water was just a little bit low. He thought, the kids, they were excited, they were splashing around. And maybe it was just the sun, it's been beating down on us, but day over day over day, the water gets lower and lower and lower. So he sets out to investigate. And there it was, a tiny little puncture. Not a big tear, not a major rupture, kind of like a pinhole. A hole small enough to ignore. But this hole could become large enough to drain the entire pool if nothing changes. And he said, I didn't realize that the whole thing was leaking until I needed it to hold. We're all filling the pools of our lives with hope. We pour our energy, we pour our plans, we pour our expectations into something. And we pour it in believing that it will hold. We pour it in expecting it to last, believing it will deliver everything that our hearts have longed for. But everything this side of heaven leaks. Your career, it leaks. Doesn't always go the way that you think it would. Your relationships, you invest so much into them, but they leak. Your finances, you set money away in a rainy day fund and it hasn't even rained yet, but there's no money in there anymore. Your health, well, at least I got my health. It leaks. Success. Here today, gone tomorrow. It leaks. Approval. That people will build us up, they will feed our egos. That leaks too. Control. At least I can control my environment. Nah, that leaks too. Because here's the reality. It all works until it doesn't. That's profound, right? Works till it doesn't. It holds until it can't. And we're left staring at a puddle where a pool used to be. And we begin to face this soggy realization. Sometimes the things we depend on the most leak the moment we need them the most. But here's the problem, you don't see it at first. You don't feel it until much later, but eventually the slow drip of disappointment, the slow drip of unmet expectations, the slow drip of human limitation, it reveals the cracks, the holes, the fissures. Because everything this side of heaven leaks. And that's exactly why the Bible does not direct our heart toward optimism. The Bible doesn't direct our heart to trust in our circumstance. The Bible definitely does not point us to hope in our self-reliance. The Bible doesn't give you the mantra of try harder. The Bible directs us to God. To God, the only one who does not leak. Because his hope doesn't fail you. And truly, hope doesn't fail you. It's just placing it in the wrong container that does. There's only one that can carry the weight of your soul. So I said, great. If everything leaks, who or what can hold my hope? For that answer, let's go to Romans chapter 15, verse 13. Romans 15, 13. And in this passage, in this moment, Paul is wrapping up what is an incredible, sweeping explanation of salvation. He's going from our sin to God's rescue, from justification to sanctification to glorification and all the Ations of the Scripture. After all of the theology, after every rich letter in this letter to the church in Rome, after all the explanation of law and grace, Paul ends with a prayer. He ends with a benediction, with a blessing, with a declaration. Here is what he writes. Romans chapter 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. I want you to notice what Paul does not say. He doesn't say, may God give you hope. He doesn't say, may God remind you of hope. He doesn't say, may God teach you about hope. What Paul says is God is the God of hope. Hope is his nature. Hope is his character. Hope is his identity. Hope isn't something that God just kind of hands out like a spiritual accessory. It's not like he says, hey, do you want a hope fanny pack or a hope backpack? You want a lanyard? What is it that how would you like to wear your hope today? I was looking for some glasses. Can I have some hope-filled glasses? God's not handing out hope like something that you just attach, that you can put on and put off anytime that you want to. Hope, real hope, it flows from who God is. And in this verse, Romans 15:13, there are two massive truths in this little verse. Here's the first one. God is the source of your hope. That's it. God is the source of your hope. If hope were a river, then God is the headwaters. If hope were electricity, then God is the power plant. If hope were oxygen, then God is the atmosphere. And everything else, every single other thing, your plans, your dreams, your strategies, they are just backup generators at best. I mean, think about it. Think about your hopes, your dreams, your plans, your strategies. In about 4 weeks or so, we're going to turn into this magical time called the new year, right? It's the moment in time where we determine that we are going to do something absolutely different. For a lot of us, it's things like, I'm going to exercise for 7 days. Because our strategies and our plans, they don't always come to fruition, right? But Paul, here's what he's saying. He says, do you want real hope? Do you want unshakable hope, unflappable hope? Do you want hope that overflows? Then here's what you do. Go to the source, the God of hope. Second thing, second truth, God is the sustainer of your hope. And this should be a relief, because what it means is that you don't have to manufacture hope. You don't have to be the source that keeps pushing hope out into the world. It means that once you find hope, you don't have to white knuckle it and hold it so tight, thinking that it will leave if you let go. And it means that you don't have to talk yourself into it. Because hope is not the result of trying harder. Hope is the result of trusting deeper. So Paul says, may the God of hope fill you. And how does he do it? By the power of the Holy Spirit. And this means that hope is something that God does in you, not something you achieve by you. You know, our hope is strongest when it's anchored in someone who never changes. And just in case you didn't know, the world changes, people change, circumstances change, but God does not change. Romans 15:13 reminds us God does not change. God does not fail. God does not leak. And that's why God can hold your hope. If Romans 15:13 is true, and it is, then the question we each had to wrestle with today is fairly simple. Where have you been placing your hope? Is it your job? Your spouse? That your circumstances will change? Where have you been placing your hope? Because whatever you anchor your hope to shapes the stability of your life. I mean, if your hope is in a promotion, then your joy rises and falls with your performance. If your hope is in people, then your peace rises and falls with their consistency. If your hope is in circumstances, then your contentment rises and falls with your calendar. If your hope is in yourself, then your confidence rises and falls with your strength. And we're friends here. We can be honest. We all run out of strength. So when Paul says, "May the God of hope fill you," he is inviting you to move your hope from something that is temporary to something that is eternal. From something that is fragile to something that is unshakable. To the one who cannot fail. Guys, this isn't just a theological idea. This is the survival skill of your soul. When you anchor your hope in the wrong things, you end up blaming the right God. God, I'm so upset. I thought that this relationship was going to fix everything that was wrong inside me, but they just walked out the door and it's all your fault. You've been there. You lived that. I've lived that. When we put our hope in something or someone that was never designed to carry the weight of our hearts, when we do that and then it collapses, we assume that God failed us. But God didn't fail. It's that your hope was misplaced. You put your hope in the wrong things. And you guys, that's why Advent matters. Because Advent is not just a countdown to Christmas. Advent is permission to name the longings that you've been carrying. Advent is the space to say, this world is not enough for me. And I'm not crazy for feeling that way. Advent gives us the language to the very ache inside us that says, listen, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for what God has done, but I am still longing. I'm longing for what he will do. So let me show you why this matters so much in the gospel story. You know, when Jesus came the first time, he didn't just arrive. When Jesus came, he fulfilled the promises that humanity had waited for centuries to see. And when Jesus comes again, he will finish every single thing that he started. So here we are, between two Advents. Between one that's already come and one that is to come. The first one proves that God keeps his promises, even through the centuries. And the second one proves that our hope is not wasted. So here we stand, in the midst of the already but the not yet. Jesus has already come. We know that. That's why we celebrate Christmas. That's why we talk about at Easter the sacrifice of Jesus, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. That's why. We've already seen the first advent, and we eagerly await the second one. And this is why Christian hope is different from every other hope in this world. Because Christian hope is not rooted in probability. Christian hope is rooted in a person. And because that person is Jesus, Jesus crucified, risen, reigning, and returning, our hope then is durable. Our hope is not fragile. Our hope does not depend on how good or how bad this year has been. So when Paul describes God as the God of hope, he's not describing something that God occasionally does. He's describing who God eternally is. God is the one who enters broken places. God is the one who restores what sin has shattered. We all live in this brokenness. God is not afraid to enter in. He's not afraid to enter in to those places that are broken by your sin and the sins of others. In fact, God is the one who doesn't run from your mess, but he steps into it. How many people can you count that would step into your mess when it all falls apart? Can you count? One hand? If you're fortunate, maybe two. But God is the one who never runs from your mess. He steps right into it. God is the one who takes the longings of your soul, your very deepest longings, and he says, I will fill that. I will fill that. And here's the gospel truth of Advent. Jesus came once to save you, and Jesus will come again to complete it. And here we are, between salvation and fulfillment. Everything in between is held together by hope. So let me ask you, where do you need hope today? Where do you need it? For some, it's in your marriage. You're trying, but you're tired. And hope, it feels like it's so far out in the distance. For some of you, it's your kids. You're praying, you're waiting, you're watching, hoping that it will change, but you don't see what God sees. For some of you, it's your health. For others, it's your mind, your finances, your future. For others, the thing you hoped for, it didn't happen. Or it happened, and it did not fulfill you the way you thought it would. And here you are, living with that go-kart kind of a moment. Put your hope there. You had waited with all the patience that you knew to have. You placed your hope in that it would appear. And in that place, your hope was disappointed. I want you to hear me in this. Hope didn't fail you. It's just the thing you put your hope in. It wasn't big enough. Romans 15:13 is an invitation to bring every bit of your disappointment, every bit of your longing, your anxiety, all of those unmet expectations, and hand them to the God who says, I am the only one strong enough to hold your hope. The God of the universe says, I am enough. I am enough. What if we became people who lived with this kind of hope? What if we just lived this kind of hope out? What if we became known in the community by our unexplainable hope? And it's hope not because life is easy, because it's not. It's not hope because everything works out. Sometimes it doesn't. Not because we ignore and step over the mess, but because our hope is not anchored in what we see. It is anchored in the one who sees everything. Could you imagine the witness of a church that was filled with people who don't deny the aching in their hearts, but refuse to let that ache define them? Could you imagine the strength of a community that believes the best days are still ahead? Not because of blind optimism, but because of Jesus. Could you imagine walking through Advent, not just remembering the first coming of Christ, but standing confidently on the promise that He will return? So maybe this should be the prayer of this church, of our church, in this season. God of hope, fill us. Fill our homes with hope. Fill our conversations with hope. Fill our families with hope. Fill our hearts with hope. God of all hope, fill us until we overflow. Because that's the promise of Romans 15:13. And that is the anchor of Advent. You guys, that's the power. That's the power of hope. Would you pray with me?